Dealing with the fact that my father-in-law passed away was hard enough. Then, in front of me, my husband Connor said something unbelievable, and I was so shocked I froze. "Let's get divorced," he said. "I got the inheritance, so I don't need you, my human ATM, anymore, Tahai." For a moment, I couldn't understand what Connor was saying. "What do you mean?" Connor, grinning smugly, was only too happy to explain. I got about 1.1 billion from Dad's inheritance. So, I don't need you anymore. Here, the divorce papers. I decided to agree to divorce Connor without telling him certain things. He'll regret this later. I'm Lily, 42 years old. I run an apparel company. I married Connor, who is 2 years younger than me. 2 years ago, our marriage started from an arranged meeting. I had been doing business for many years with President Jackson, Connor's father. Connor was his only son. Initially, President Jackson considered Connor as his successor. However, Connor had no such intentions and wasn't particularly good at his job. Therefore, Connor was soon removed from the list of successor candidates and worked in the company as a regular employee. Attracted me to Connor was his easygoing nature. Since I was young, I was often told by those around me that I was meticulous and serious. I liked studying and was often praised for it, but on the other hand, I was also often avoided for being too rigid. I've been told by people I've dated in the past that I'm not charming enough. It's like I'm dating a boss, not a girlfriend. It was shocking when I heard it, but I always thought maybe I was indeed too serious. Being laughed at for being inflexible was a common occurrence. That to me, Connor seemed like someone from a different world. Oops. But was today the shop's day off? I asked on our first date. It was a small place, but the atmosphere was warm and cozy. I was surprised by Connor's choice, but I also felt relieved. He seemed to be a genuine person who enjoyed simple things in life. He took me to a restaurant he recommended, but it turned out to be closed that day. If it were me, I would have panicked over such an unplanned situation. But Connor was different. "Then, how about that diner over there?" he said, easily changing plans. And for someone as unadaptable as me, his response was an eye-opener. I thought that by being with him, I could become as adaptable and spontaneous as he is, and so I decided to marry Connor. Just the people around me were surprisingly opposed to the idea. "There are better people out there for you," some would whisper to me. Even Jackson, who would be my father-in-law, didn't seem very enthusiastic. "I feel bad, as if I'm pushing my son onto you," he asked me. Back then, I thought, they just don't understand how great he is, but recently I've started to think that maybe they were right. Right after we got married, Connor quit his job. He stopped going to work suddenly without discussing it with anyone. When worried, I and Jackson asked him why. Connor casually said, "What? Why work when Lily is earning? Do I really need to?" Both I and Jackson were speechless at this, appalled. Why would he leave the responsibility of earning solely to me? After that, despite several attempts by me and Jackson to persuade him, Connor's mind did not change. Why bother working when I can't earn as much as Lily anyway? Connor's declaration of being a stay-at-home husband made me want to divorce him right after we got married. If he were in his 20s, I might have thought he was cute. But the man throwing a tantrum in front of me was nearing 40. Eventually, we reluctantly settled on him taking care of the household chores. Connor's parents had divorced a few years ago. Apparently, Connor's mother wasn't very good at household chores. She couldn't do anything, so he never learned, Connor seemed to be making excuses, as if his inability to do household chores was his mother's fault. Initially, Connor couldn't do any housework at all, but after patiently teaching and praising him, he eventually managed to do the basics. However, just because he could do them didn't mean he was particularly good at them. Still, he seemed quite satisfied with himself. Thanks to me taking care of the house, Lily can work. Be grateful, he would say. There was something slightly irritating about the confident look on Connor's face, but I didn't want to ruin everything by saying the wrong thing. Yes, I'm really grateful for your help, Connor, I answered, forcing a smile on my face. There were times I felt irritated, but I think we were living together reasonably well. About a year into our marriage, a turning point came. Jackson adopted a son. The boy, named Andy, was 9 years old, a seemingly ordinary boy. Jackson is not the type to do things without meaning. Why did he suddenly adopt Andy? I asked him when we were alone. It's a secret, he said, and told me. Andy was the child of one of his subordinates, whom he adored like his own child. Jackson, who had close family ties with Andy's parents, cared for him like a grandchild. I just wanted him to be happy. Recently, Andy's parents had died in an accident. They had married in a sort of elopement, so Andy had no close relatives to rely on. I don't know if Andy will be happy with me, but if he wants to stay, I want to be with him. That's why I decided to adopt him. At the adoption, Andy would have had to go to a facility. I see. That's very much like you, Jackson. Connor and I don't have any children. Significant other. Please, don't hesitate to ask for help if you need anything. Jackson smiled happily at my words. Afterwards, thankfully, he occasionally relied on me as I had offered. I only took care of Andy on nights when Jackson absolutely couldn't come home due to work or other unavoidable commitments. At first, Andy was a bit nervous, but he soon warmed up to me. He must be a sociable child, or maybe he was trying to fit in his own way. Thinking about it made me feel indescribable. On the other hand, Connor was not pleased about this situation. His father adopting an unknown child can be confusing. I understood that when I tried to talk to Connor about it. Surprisingly, his concern was focused on just one point. Adopting a child? What's he thinking? My share of the inheritance will decrease now. I thought I'd have it all to myself. I couldn't believe my ears. Connor wasn't having complex feelings towards Andy. He was simply worried about his share of the inheritance decreasing. I'm going to talk to Dad about this. I'm not okay with it. One day saying so, Connor went to confront his father. At least when he returned home after a while, contrary to my worries, he was in a very good mood. Seeing his cheerful face, I cautiously asked how to do. "Oh, it's fine. My share won't change." "Really? Is that so? I thought adopted children had the same inheritance rights as biological children," but Connor explained otherwise, looking quite pleased with himself. A tone caught Elisidat's. Dad's making Andy renounce his inheritance rights. Makes sense, right? I'm his only son after all. I couldn't believe that Jackson, who spoke of Andy so lovingly, would plan to leave him nothing. Something didn't feel right. I wasn't convinced, but Connor was relieved, saying, "That's a relief." Well, if Jackson says so, there must be some reason behind it. Anyway, Jackson is still in his 60s. Inheritance shouldn't be a concern for a while. In fact, it seemed more likely that I would divorce Connor before my father-in-law passed away. I was thinking about this casually, but what I feared came much sooner than expected. A year later, Jackson was involved in an accident and passed away. Ever imagined I'd have to bid farewell to him so soon? I had known him longer than I had Connor. He was a man I respected, both professionally and personally. After hearing the news, I was overwhelmed with grief and couldn't stop crying. Fixing to negative forward though back, I forced myself to work through the heavy eyes and headache from crying too much to prepare for the funeral. Connor was the chief mourner, but he didn't seem to grieve. He just seemed lost in thought. Perhaps the sudden loss of his father was too shocking for him to grasp. Instead of Connor, I had to take charge of the funeral arrangements. I managed to hold back my tears, though it was hard. That the funeral was difficult for me, but seeing Andy silently weeping was even harder. Throughout, Connor didn't shed a single tear, which I found a bit odd. Rather than grieving, he seemed restless, almost agitated. Sometime after the funeral, the reason for his behavior became clear. "Connor, aren't you acting strange? Aren't you sad about your father's death?" I was worried about Connor not crying, but his response was unexpected.
"Yeah, I'm sad, of course."
But I can't help feeling more happy than sad. Oops, did my joy show through? What? You know, Lily, Dad was the president of a big company. He must have had a lot of money. Can you guess how much the inheritance is? What? How terrible. All this time, from before the funeral until now, Connor hadn't been grieving his father at all. He was just excited about the inheritance. How could you think like that? What are you thinking? Of course, I'm thinking about it. My mom and dad were divorced, so she has no inheritance rights. I'm his only biological child. Andy has renounced his inheritance, so it's all mine. How can I not be excited? Connor's face looked like he was about to burst into laughter. His expression was so relaxed, I almost couldn't hold back my anger. He seemed genuinely happy about his father's passing. I can't believe it. You're heartless. Say whatever you want. I wanted to walk away right then. But before I did, there was something I had to tell Connor. It was about Andy. With his father gone, I had asked Connor to temporarily keep Andy with us, but without other arrangements, Andy would end up in a facility. I had decided that I wanted to raise Andy myself. About Andy,
Oh, you're taking him in.
that's fine by me. Connor's easy agreement surprised me, but he continued with a smile. Because whatever you decide, it doesn't matter to me anymore. When?
Let's get divorced. Now that I got the inheritance, I don't need you, my human Adam, anymore. FIL.
Just for a moment, I couldn't understand what Connor was saying. Did he just refer to me as an ATM? Yes, and say I was no longer needed. What do you mean? When I asked him again, Connor, grinning smugly, explained proudly. Extraction, I got about 1.1 billion from Dad's inheritance. So I don't need you anymore, he continued. That's it, this much money. I don't need to work anymore. Don't need to keep you happy. Isn't we pamp no more bothering with tedious household chores? Oh, how lucky I am. Touching him, I was deeply shocked. The inheritance was money coming in because of his father's death. Yet he was acting as if he had won the lottery. I had felt it before, but now it was clear. Connor showed no signs of mourning his father or feeling sad. He was genuinely thrilled. But money is a frightening thing. It's not unusual for someone to change completely after getting a large sum. Perhaps Connor was just overwhelmed by the sudden wealth. Calm down, Connor. Let's talk about this first. I placed my hand on Connor's shoulder, but he quickly shook it off and yelled at me angrily. Shut up, you uptight woman. Uptight? I married you because Dad introduced me, and you were a female CEO. I've always felt suffocated with you. It's been hard. Connor continued to express his dissatisfaction with me. Do you know how constricted I felt? I was expecting someone exciting because it was a match made by Dad, but then you showed up so plain and boring. What a disappointment. He could have just refused the arranged marriage. I didn't force him, nor did I aggressively pursue him. He'd being portrayed as the victim was unfair. Then why did you marry me? You could have just said no. Isn't it obvious? For the money. Who else would marry someone like you? Kona laughed at me mockingly. Basically, he admitted he married me for my money. It was a long time ago, so I'll be honest. Connor revealed a shocking fact. I had a significant amount of debt, you know? What? I'd said if I married you and devoted myself to you, he would pay it off in return. Look. So, of course, I had to marry you. So, Connor never loved me or anything like that from the start. He just married me for the money. Well, it wasn't fun, but thanks to you, here I am. Thanks for that. Watching Connor laugh coarsely, I made up my mind. I don't need to know such a person anymore. I swallowed the last piece of advice I thought to give him. Then I started filling out the divorce form without hesitation. I was surprised at how quickly and decisively I was able to write.
What? You decided to divorce Andres? Hun.
Here, the divorce papers. After finishing, I even felt a sense of accomplishment. With this, you and I are strangers. No more connections. Yeah. Now we're free. He can live with that kid, and I can have fun with young women. I miss you, May. Panor was ecstatic. Just from what I saw of him, he was faithful during the marriage. I never suspected it, but as far as that goes, I am impressed. But if you're this happy, you should have divorced me sooner. Couldn't help it. I wanted the money. Connor carelessly stuffed the divorce papers into his bag and hurriedly left our home. Continuing to live in the house I shared with Connor felt wrong. I decided it was time for a fresh start and to sell the house. Ideally, I wanted to live near my parents' home. It would be helpful for both Andy and me. Andy would have to change schools, but he was okay with it, saying it's fine. A bit sad, but this made it easier to look for a new place without worry. Finding a property was challenging, but I finally made a decision. The main factors were the proximity to my parents' home and the location's convenience. It was expensive, but considering Andy, it seemed perfect. Andy was thrilled during the house viewing, exclaiming, "Ow, a mansion." The house had plenty of space and intricate interiors. There's also a lot of storage space, which has been a source of concern. Surprisingly, it even had a pool. Not necessary for me, but Andy was excited about it. Wow, it was amazing. Any house would have been fine for just me, but I was happy to see him pleased. And so we moved. It took some time for both of us to get used to the new place, but gradually it became a haven of peace. Just around that time, I received a message from Connor. He seemed desperate, saying, "I want to meet and apologize right away." I had a good idea why he suddenly wanted to apologize. After leaving Andy with my mother, I headed to the family restaurant I had specified. Connor had arrived before me and was sitting in a corner booth, looking pale and on the verge of tears. "Lily, what do you want? We're strangers now, remember?" But he hasn't uttered a single word of apology after how much you hated our marriage. Regretting it and all, how can you even ask me for help now? That was, well, I didn't expect things to turn out like this. His honesty was astounding. It was as if he was admitting he only turned to me for money again because he needed it. "Unfortunately, I can't meet your expectations. I don't have any money." "What? No way. That's impossible. I know your company is thriving. You liar." It's frustrating how he blames me for his own problems. I'm not lying. I just don't have money to lend you. Atmos don't just lend to anyone, especially not when there's no chance of getting the money back. Connor seemed to remember his own harsh words from before, his face showing a hint of embarrassment. Yet, he still didn't apologize, showing an oddly high level of pride. "What's with you? You're so cold. Don't you care what happens to me? Oh, have you forgotten what you said when we divorced? Once we divorce, we're strangers. Whatever happens to each other is no longer our concern. Weren't those your words?" It's baffling how he can act like a victim. How thick-skinned can he be? Does he have some ability to forget anything that's inconvenient for him? Maybe I said something like that, but it wasn't really how I felt. I never thought things would turn out like this. Connor leaned on the table, looking downcast. I even thought about life insurance, but the lawyer said I'm not the beneficiary. Oh, really? Zessa. My laughter and response made Kona look at me wide-eyed. Don't tell me, Lily. I'd left it to you. No, not me. Then why are you laughing? I just felt a bit sorry for you. Because with life insurance, unlike inheritance, you wouldn't have had to take on the debt. Indeed. That's why Jackson had Andy renounce the inheritance. He left something for Andy in a different way, through life insurance. For the beneficiary of Jackson's life insurance was Andy. Is that all you wanted to talk about? If so, I'm leaving. There's nothing I can do for you. Wait, please. What about starting over? Back then, I was just upset about Dad, and I do care about you, Lily. You only cared about the money, right? I know. Connor was denying and saying all sorts of things, but I was not going to be fooled again. Again, I didn't have any money to give to such a person. Well, I have someone important waiting for me at home. I left the family restaurant, hearing Connor's cries of despair behind me. They were just noise to me now. I needed to get back quickly, as Andy might be hungry, or perhaps my mother gave him something to eat. I hurried towards the station. Action as poor Connor. I heard he's been working multiple part-time jobs to pay off his debts. Just with no work experience, qualifications, or motivation, it seems he couldn't land a full-time position anywhere. Once, on my way to a meeting, I spotted him working at a convenience store. He looked older and much more worn out than before. As the consequences of living off others' money had finally caught up to him. I felt no sympathy for him. Meanwhile, Andy and I are living a peaceful life. Recently, we've even started to argue and fight. It was disheartening when Andy ignored me after a fight, but I took it as a sign that he's opening up to me. I plan to be there for him until the day he can stand on his own. That must have been Jackson's wish, and now it's my own goal in life.